the lights of the palace were all turned off. No moon or star came down through that deep, dark water. The green got gloomier and gloomier until it was all black, and there was not a glimmer, except when big luminous fish went by slowly through the weeds. Yet Roverandom slept soundly that night, and the next night, and several nights after. And the next day, and the day after, he looked for the wizard, and couldn't find him anywhere. One morning, when he was beginning already to feel quite a sea-dog, and to wonder if he had come to stay there forever, the mer-dog said to him, "Bother that wizard. Or rather, don't bother him. Give him a miss today. Let's go off for a really long swim." Off they went, and the long swim turned into an excursion lasting for days. They covered a terrific distance in the time. They were enchanted creatures, you must remember, and there were few ordinary things in the seas that could keep up with them. When they got tired of the cliffs and mountains at the bottom, and of the racing runs in the middle heights, they rose up and up and up, right through the water for a mile and a bit, and when they got to the top, no land was to be seen. The sea all round them was smooth and calm and grey. Then it suddenly ruffled and went dark in patches, under a little cold wind, the wind at dawn. Swiftly the sun looked up with a shout over the rim of the sea, red as if he had been drinking hot wine, and swiftly he leapt into the air and went off for his daily journey, turning all the edges of the waves golden, and the shadows between them dark green. A ship was sailing on the margin of the sea and the sky, and it sailed right into the sun, so that its masts were black against the fire. "Where's that going to?" asked Roverandom. "Oh, Japan, or Honolulu, or Manila, or Easter Island, or Thursday, or Vladivostok, or somewhere or other, I suppose," said the mer-dog, whose geography was a bit vague, in spite of his hundreds of years of boasted prowlings. "This is the Pacific, I believe, but I don't know which part. A warm part, by the feel of it. It's rather a large piece of water. Let's go and look for something to eat." When they got back, some days later, Roverandom at once went to look for the wizard again. He felt he had given him a good long rest. "Please, Mr. Artaxerxes, could you bother—" he began as usual. "No, I could not," said Artaxerxes, even more definitely than usual. This time he really was busy, though. The complaints had come in by post. Of course, as you can imagine, all kinds of things go wrong in the sea that not even the best Pam in the ocean could prevent, and some of which he is not even supposed to have anything to do with. Wrecks come down plump now and again on the roof of somebody's sea house. Explosions occur in the seabed. Oh yes, they have volcanoes and all that kind of nuisance quite as badly as we have, and blow up somebody's prize flock of goldfish, or prize bed of anemones, or one and only pearl oyster, or famous rock and coral garden, or savage fish have a fight in the highway and knock mer-children over, or absent-minded sharks swim in at the dining-room window and spoil the dinner, or the deep, dark, unmentionable monsters of the black abysses do horrible and wicked things. The merfolk have always put up with all this, but not without complaining. They liked complaining. They used, of course, to write letters to the Weekly Weed, the Mermail, and Ocean Notions, but they had a Pam now, and they wrote to him as well, and blamed him for everything, even if they got their tails nipped by their own pet lobsters. They said his magic was inadequate, as it sometimes was, and that his salary ought to be reduced, which was true, but rude, and that he was too big for his boots, which was also near the mark. They should have said slippers. He was too lazy to wear boots often. And they said lots besides to worry Artaxerxes every morning, and especially on Mondays. It was always worst, by several hundred envelopes on Mondays, and this was a Monday. So Artaxerxes threw a lump of rock at Roverandom, and he slipped off like a shrimp from a net. He was jolly glad when he got out into the garden to find that he was still unchanged in shape, and I dare say if he had not removed himself quick, The wizard would have changed him into a sea slug, or sent him to the back of beyond, wherever that is, or even to Pot, which is at the bottom of the deepest sea. He was very annoyed, and he went and grumbled to the sea rover. "You'd better give him a rest till Monday is over, at any rate," advised the murdog. "And I should miss out Mondays altogether in future, if I were you. Come and have another swim." After that, Roverandom gave the wizard such a long rest that they almost forgot about one another. Not quite. Dogs don't forget lumps of rock very quickly, but to all appearances Roverandom had settled down to become a permanent pet of the palace. He was always off somewhere with the murdog, and often the mer-children came along as well. They were not as jolly as real two-legged children, in Roverandom's opinion, but then, of course, Roverandom did not really belong to the sea and was not a perfect judge. But they kept him happy, and they might have kept him there forever and have made him forget Little Boy 2 in the end if it had not been for things that happened later. You can make up your mind whether Psamothos had anything to do with these events when we come to them. There were plenty of these children to choose from, at any rate. The old Mer-King had hundreds of daughters and thousands of grandchildren, and all in the same palace. And they were all fond of the two rovers, and so was Mrs. Artaxerxes. It was a pity that Roverandom never thought of telling her his story. She knew how to manage the Pam in any mood. But in that case, of course, Roverandom would have gone back sooner and missed many of the sights. It was with Mrs. Artaxerxes and some of the mer-children that he visited the Great White Caves, where all the jewels that are lost in the sea, and many that have always been in the sea, and of course pearls upon pearls, are hoarded and hidden. They went too, another time, to visit the smaller sea fairies in their little glass houses at the bottom of the sea. The sea fairies seldom swim, but wander, singing, over the bed of the sea in smooth places, or drive in shell carriages harnessed to the tiniest fishes, or else they ride astride little green crabs with bridles of fine threads, which of course don't prevent the crabs from going sideways, as they always will. And they have troubles with the sea goblins that are larger and ugly and rowdy, and do nothing except fight and hunt fish and gallop about on seahorses. Those goblins can live out of the water for a long while, and play in the surf at the water's edge in a storm. So can some of the sea fairies, but they prefer the calm, warm nights of summer evenings on lonely shores, and naturally are very seldom seen in consequence. Another day, old Owen turned up again and gave the two dogs a ride for a change. It was like riding on a moving mountain. They were away for days and days, and they only turned back from the eastern edge of the world just in time. There the whale rose to the top and blew out a fountain of water so high that a lot of it was thrown right off the world and over the edge. Another time he took them to the other side, or as near as he dared, and that was a still longer and more exciting journey, the most marvellous of all Roverandom's travels, as he realized later, when he was grown to be an older and a wiser dog. It would take the whole of another story at least to tell you of all their adventures in uncharted waters, and of their glimpses of lands unknown to geography, before they passed the shadowy seas and reached the great Bay of Fairyland, as we call it, beyond the Magic Isles, and saw, far off, in the last west, the mountains of Elvenhome, and the light of Fairy upon the waves. Roverandom thought he caught a glimpse of the city of the elves on the green hill beneath the mountains, a glint of white far away. But Owen dived again so suddenly that he could not be sure. If he was right, he is one of the very few creatures on 2 legs or 4 who can walk about our own lands and say they have glimpsed that other land, however far away. "I should catch it if this was found out," said Owen. "No one from the outer lands is supposed ever to come here, and few ever do now. Mum's the word." What did I say about dogs? They don't forget ill-tempered lumps of rock. Well then, in spite of all these varied sightseeings and these astonishing journeys, Roverandom kept it in his underneath mind all the time, and it came back into his upper mind as soon as ever he got back home. His very first thought was, "Where's that old wizard? What's the use of being polite to him? I'll spoil his trousers again if I get half a chance." He was in that frame of mind when, after trying in vain to have a word alone with Artaxerxes, he saw the magician go by, down one of the royal roads leading from the palace. He was, of course, too proud at his age to grow a tail or fins or learn to swim properly. The only thing he did like a fish was to drink, even in the sea, so he must have been thirsty. He spent a lot of time that might have been employed on official business conjuring up cider into large barrels in his private apartments. When he wanted to get about quickly, he drove. When Roverandom saw him, he was driving in his express, a gigantic shell shaped like a cockle and drawn by 7 sharks. People got out of the way quick, for the sharks could bite. "Let's follow," said Roverandom to the mer-dog, and follow they did. And the 2 bad dogs dropped pieces of rock into the carriage whenever it passed under cliffs. They could nip along amazingly fast, as I told you, and they whizzed ahead, hid in weed bushes, and pushed anything loose they could find over the edge. It annoyed the wizard intensely, but they took care that he did not spot them. Artaxerxes was in a very bad temper before he started, and he was in a rage before he had gone far. A rage not unmixed with anxiety, for he was going to investigate the damage done by an unusual whirlpool that had suddenly appeared, and in a part of the sea that he did not like at all. He thought, and he was quite right, that there were nasty things in that direction that were best left alone. I dare say you can guess what was the matter. Artaxerxes did. The ancient sea serpent was waking, or half thinking about it. He had been in a sound sleep for years, but now he was turning. When he was uncoiled, he would certainly have reached 100 miles. Some people say he would reach from edge to edge, but that is an exaggeration. And when he is curled up, there is only one cave other than Pot, where he used to live, and many people wish him back there, only one cave in all the oceans that will hold him. And that is, very unfortunately, not 100 miles from the Mer-King's palace. When he undid a curl or two in his sleep, the water heaved and shook and bent people's houses and spoilt their repose for miles and miles around. But it was very stupid to send the Pam to look into it. For, of course, the sea serpent is much too enormous and strong and old and idiotic for anyone to control. Primordial, prehistoric, autothalassic, fabulous, mythical, and silly are other adjectives applied to him. And Artaxerxes knew it all only too well. Not even the man in the moon, working hard for 50 years, could have concocted a spell large enough, or long enough, or strong enough to bind him. Only once had the man in the moon tried, when specially requested, and at least one continent fell into the sea as a result. Poor old Artaxerxes drove straight up to the mouth of the sea serpent's cave, but he had no sooner got out of his carriage than he saw the tip of the sea serpent's tail sticking out of the entrance. Larger it was than a row of gigantic water barrels, and green and slimy. That was quite enough for him. He wanted to go home at once before the worm turned again, as all worms will, at odd and unexpected moments. It was little Roverandom that upset everything. He did not know anything about the sea serpent or its tremendousness. All he thought about was baiting the ill-tempered wizard. So, when a chance came, Artaxerxes was standing, staring stupid-like at the visible end of the serpent, and his steeds were taking no particular notice of anything. He crept up and bit one of the shark's tails for fun. For fun! What fun! The shark jumped straight forward and the carriage jumped forward too, and Artaxerxes, who had just turned round to get into it, fell on his back. Then the shark bit the only thing it could reach at the moment, which was the shark in front, and that shark bit the next one, and so on, until the last of the 7, seeing nothing else to bite, bless me the idiot if he did not go and bite the sea serpent's tail. The sea serpent gave a new and very unexpected turn, and the next thing the dogs knew was being whirled all over the place in water gone mad, bumping into giddy fishes and spinning sea trees, scared out of their lives in a cloud of uprooted weeds, sand, shells, slugs, periwinkles and oddments. And things got worse and worse, and the serpent kept on turning, and there was old Artaxerxes clinging onto the reins of the sharks, being whirled all over the place too, and saying the most dreadful things to them. To the sharks, I mean. Luckily for this story, he never knew what Roverandom had done. I don't know how the dogs got home. It was a long, long time before they did, at any rate. First of all, they were washed up on the shore, in one of the terrible tides caused by the sea serpent's stirrings. And then they were caught by fishermen on the other side of the sea, and jolly nearly sent to an aquarium. A disgusting fate. And then, having escaped that by the skin of their feet, they had to get all the way back themselves as best they could, through perpetual subterranean commotion. And when at last they got home, there was a terrible commotion there too. All the merfolk were crowded round the palace, all shouting at once. "Bring out the Pam!" Yes, they called him that publicly, and nothing longer or more dignified. "Bring out the Pam! Bring out the Pam!" And the Pam was hiding in the cellars. Mrs. Artaxerxes found him there at last, and made him come out. And all the merfolk shouted when he looked out of an attic window. "Stop this nonsense! Stop this nonsense! Stop this nonsense!" And they made such a hullabaloo that people at all the seasides, all over the world, thought the sea was roaring louder than usual. It was. And all the while the sea serpent kept on turning, trying absent-mindedly to get the tip of his tail in his mouth. But thank heavens, he was not properly and fully awake, or he might have come out and shaken his tail in anger, and then another continent would have been drowned. Of course, whether that would have been really regrettable or not depends on which continent was taken, and which you live on. But the merfolk did not live on a continent, but in the sea, and right in the thick of it, and very thick it was getting, and they insisted that it was the Mer-King's business to make the Pam produce some spell, remedy, or solution to keep the sea serpent quiet. They could not get their hands to their faces to feed themselves, or blow their noses, the water shook so. And everybody was bumping into everybody else, and all the fish were seasick. The water was so wobbly, and it was so turbid and so full of sand that everyone had coughs, and all the dancing was stopped. Artaxerxes groaned, but he had to do something. So he went to his workshop and shut himself up for a fortnight, during which time there were 3 earthquakes, 2 submarine hurricanes, and several riots of the mer-people. Then he came out and let loose a most prodigious spell, accompanied with soothing incantation, at a distance from the cave, and everybody went home and sat in cellars waiting. Everybody except Mrs. Artaxerxes and her unfortunate husband. The wizard was obliged to stay, at a distance, but not a safe one, and watch the result, and Mrs. Artaxerxes was obliged to stay and watch the wizard. All the spell did was to give the serpent a terrible bad dream. He dreamed that he was covered all over with barnacles, very irritating, and partly true, and also being slowly roasted in a volcano, very painful, and unfortunately quite imaginary. And that woke him. Probably Artaxerxes' magic was better than was supposed. At any rate, the sea serpent did not come out. Luckily for this story, he put his head where his tail was, and yawned, opened his mouth as wide as the cave, and snorted so loud that everyone in the cellars heard him in all the kingdoms of the sea. And the sea serpent said, "Stop this nonsense!" And he added, "If this blithering wizard doesn't go away at once, and if he ever so much as paddles in the sea again, I shall come out, and I shall eat him first, and then I shall knock everything to dripping smithereens. That's all. Good night." And Mrs. Artaxerxes carried the Pam home in a fainting fit. When he had recovered, and that was quick, they saw to that, he took the spell off the serpent and packed his bag, and all the people said and shouted, "Send the Pam away! A good riddance! That's all! Goodbye!" And the Mer-King said, "We don't want to lose you, but we think you ought to go." And Artaxerxes felt very small and unimportant altogether, which was good for him. Even the Mer-Dog laughed at him. But funnily enough, Roverandom was quite upset. After all, he had his own reasons for knowing that Artaxerxes' magic was not without effect. And he had bitten the shark's tail too, hadn't he? And he had started the whole thing with that trouser bite. And he belonged to the land himself, and felt it was a bit hard on a poor land wizard being baited by all these sea folk. Anyway, he came up to the old fellow and said, "Please, Mr. Artaxerxes." "Well?" said the wizard, quite kindly. He was so glad not to be called Pam, and he had not heard a Mr. for weeks. "Well? What is it, little dog?" "I beg your pardon, I do really. Awfully sorry. I never meant to damage your reputation." Roverandom was thinking of the sea serpent and the shark's tail, but luckily Artaxerxes thought he was referring to his trousers. Come, he said. "We won't bring up bygones. Least said, soon as mended, or patched. I think we had both better go back home again, together." "But please, Mr. Artaxerxes," said Roverandom, "could you bother to turn me back into my proper size?" "Certainly," said the wizard, glad to find somebody that still believed he could do anything at all. "Certainly. But you are best and safest as you are while you are down here. Let's get away from this first. And I am really and truly busy just now." And he really and truly was. He went into the workshops and collected all his paraphernalia, insignia, symbols, memoranda, books of recipes, arcana, apparatus, and bags and bottles of miscellaneous spells. He burned all that would burn in his waterproof forge, and the rest he tipped into the back garden. Extraordinary things took place there afterwards. All the flowers went mad, and the vegetables were monstrous, and the fishes that ate them were turned into sea worms, sea cats, sea cows, sea lions, sea tigers, sea devils, porpoises, dugongs, cephalopods, manatees and calamities, or merely poisoned. And phantasms, visions, bewilderments, illusions, and hallucinations sprouted so thick that nobody had any peace in the palace at all, and they were obliged to move. In fact, they began to respect the memory of that wizard after they had lost him, but that was long afterwards, at the moment they were clamouring for him to depart. When all was ready, Artaxerxes said goodbye to the Mer-King, rather coldly, and not even the Mer-children seemed to mind very much. He had so often been busy, and occasions of the bubbles, like the one I told you about, had been rare. Some of his countless sisters-in-law tried to be polite, especially if Mrs. Artaxerxes was there, but really everybody was impatient to see him going out of the gate, so that they could send a humble message to the sea serpent. "The regrettable wizard has departed, and will return no more, your worship. Pray go to sleep." Of course Mrs. Artaxerxes went too. The Mer-King had so many daughters that he could afford to lose one without much grief, especially the 10th eldest. He gave her a bag of jewels and a wet kiss on the doorstep and went back to his throne. But everybody else was very sorry, and especially Mrs. Artaxerxes' mass of mer-nieces and mer-nephews, and they were also very sorry to lose Roverandom too. The sorriest of all, and the most downcast, was the mer-dog. "Just drop me a line whenever you go to the seaside," he said, "and I will pop up and have a look at you." "I won't forget," said Roverandom. And then they went. The oldest whale was waiting. Roverandom sat on Mrs. Artaxerxes' lap, and when they were all settled on the whale's back, off they started. And all the people said, "Goodbye," very loud, and "A good riddance of bad rubbish," quietly, but not too quietly. And that was the end of Artaxerxes and the office of Pacific and Atlantic magician. Who has done their bewitchments for them since, I don't know. Old Psamathe and the man in the moon, I should think, have managed it between them. They are perfectly capable of it. The whale landed on a quiet shore far, far away from the cove of Psamathe. Artaxerxes was most particular about that. There Mrs. Artaxerxes and the whale were left, while the wizard, with Roverandom in his pocket, walked a couple of miles or so to the neighbouring seaside town to get an old suit and a green hat and some tobacco, in exchange for the wonderful suit of velvet which created a sensation in the streets. He also purchased a bath chair for Mrs. Artaxerxes. You must not forget her tail. "Please, Mr. Artaxerxes," began Roverandom once more when they were sitting on the beach again in the afternoon. The wizard was smoking a pipe with his back against the whale, looking happier than he had done for a long while, and not at all busy. "What about my proper shape, if you don't mind, and my proper size, too, please?" "Oh, very well," said Artaxerxes. "I thought I might just have had a nap before getting busy, but I don't mind. Let's get it over. Where's my—" And then he stopped short. He had suddenly remembered that he had burnt and thrown away all his spells at the bottom of the deep blue sea. He really was dreadfully upset. He got up and felt in his trouser pockets and his waistcoat pockets and his coat pockets, inside and out, and he could not find the least bit of magic anywhere in any of them. Of course not, the silly old fellow. He was so flustered he had even forgotten that it was only an hour or two since he had bought his suit in a pawnbroker's shop. As a matter of fact, it had belonged to, or at any rate been sold by, an elderly butler, and he had gone through the pockets pretty thoroughly first. The wizard sat down and mopped his forehead with a purple handkerchief, looking thoroughly miserable again. "I really am very, very sorry," he said. "I never meant to leave you like this for ever and ever, but now I don't see that it can be helped. Let it be a lesson to you not to bite the trousers of nice, kind wizards." "Ridiculous nonsense," said Mrs. Artaxerxes. "Nice, kind wizard indeed. There is no nice or kind or wizard about it if you don't give the little dog back his shape and size at once. And what's more, I shall go back to the bottom of the deep blue sea and never come back to you again." Poor old Artaxerxes looked almost as worried as he did when the sea serpent was giving trouble. "My dear," he said, "I'm very sorry, but I went and put my very strongest anti-removal spell preserver on the dog, after Psamathe began to interfere, drat him, and just to show him that he can't do everything, that I won't have sand-rabbit wizards interfering in my private bit of fun, and I quite forgot to save the antidote when I was clearing up down below. I used to keep it in a little black bag hanging on the door in my workshop. Dear me. I'm sure you'll agree that it was only meant to be a bit of fun," he said, turning to Roverandom, and his old nose got very large and red with his distress. He went on saying, "Dear, dear, dearie me," and shaking his head and beard, and he never noticed that Roverandom was not taking any notice, and the whale was winking. Mrs. Artaxerxes had got up and gone to her luggage, and now she was laughing and holding out an old black bag in her hand. "Now, stop waggling your beard and get to business," she said. But when Artaxerxes saw the bag, he was too surprised for a moment to do anything but look at it with his old mouth wide open. "Come along," said his wife. "It is your bag, isn't it? I picked it up, and several other little oddments that belonged to me, on the nasty rubbish heap you made in the garden." She opened the bag to peep inside, and out jumped the wizard's magic fountain pen wand, and also a cloud of funny smoke came out, twisting itself into strange shapes and curious faces. Then Artaxerxes woke up. "Here, give it to me! You're wasting it!" he cried. And he grabbed Roverandom by the scruff of his neck and popped him, kicking and yapping, into the bag before you could say knife. Then he turned the bag round 3 times, waving the pen in the other hand, and "Thank you. That'll do nicely," he said, and opened the bag. It was a loud bang, and lo and behold, there was no bag, only Rover, just as he had always been before he first met the wizard that morning on the lawn. Well, perhaps not just the same. He was a bit bigger, as he was now some months older. It is no good trying to describe how excited he felt, or how funny and smaller everything seemed, even the oldest whale, nor how strong and ferocious Rover felt. For just one moment he looked longingly at the wizard's trousers, but he did not want the story to begin all over again. So, after he had run a mile in circles for joy and nearly barked his head off, he came back and said, "Thank you." And he even added, "Very pleased to have met you," which was very polite indeed. "That's all right," said Artaxerxes, "and that's the last magic I shall do. I'm going to retire, and you had better be getting home. I have no magic left to send you home with, so you'll have to walk. But that won't hurt a strong young dog." So Rover said goodbye, and the whale winked, and Mrs. Artaxerxes gave him a piece of cake, and that was the last he saw of them for a long while. Long, long afterwards, when he was visiting a seaside place that he had never been to before, he found out what had happened to them, for they were there. Not the whale, of course, but the retired wizard and his wife. They had settled in that seaside town, and Artaxerxes, taking the name of Mr. A. Pam, had set up a cigarette and chocolate shop near the beach. But he was very, very careful never to touch the water, even fresh water, and that he found no hardship. A poor trade for a wizard, but he did at least try to clear up the nasty mess that his customers made on the beach, and he made a good deal of money out of Pam's rock, which was very pink and sticky. There may have been the least bit of magic in it, for children liked it so much they went on eating it even after they had dropped it in the sand. But Mrs. Artaxerxes, I should say Mrs. A. Pam, made much more money. She kept bathing tents and vans, and gave swimming lessons, and drove home in a bath chair drawn by white ponies, and wore the Merking's jewels in the afternoon, and became very famous, so that no one ever alluded to her tale. In the meanwhile, however, Rover is plodding down the country lanes and highways, going along following his nose, which is bound to lead him home in the end, as dogs' noses do. All the man in the moon's dreams don't come true, then. Just as he said himself, thought Rover as he padded along. This was evidently one that didn't. I don't even know the name of the place where the little boys live, and that's a pity. The dry land, he found, was often as dangerous a place for a dog as the moon or the ocean, though much duller. Motor after motor racketed by, filled, Rover thought, with the same people, all making all speed and all dust and all smell to somewhere. I don't believe half of them know where they are going to, or why they are going there, or wouldn't know it if they got there, grumbled Rover, as he coughed and choked. And his feet got tired on the hard, gloomy black roads, so he turned into the fields, and had many mild adventures of the bird and rabbit sort in an aimless kind of way, and more than one enjoyable fight with other dogs, and several hurried flights from larger dogs. And so, at last, weeks or months since the tale began, he could not have told you which, he got back to his own garden gate. And there was the little boy, playing on the lawn with a yellow ball, and the dream had come true, just as he had never expected. "There's Roverandom!" cried Little Boy 2 with a shout. And Rover sat up and begged, and could not find his voice to bark anything, and the little boy kissed his head and went dashing into the house, crying, "Here's my little begging dog! Come back, large and real!" He told his grandmother all about it. How was Rover to know that he had belonged to the little boy's grandmother all the while? He had only belonged to her a month or two when he was bewitched. But I wonder how much Psamathe and Artaxerxes had known about it. The grandmother, very surprised indeed as she was at her dog's return, looking so well and not motor-smashed or lorry-flattened at all, did not understand what on earth the little boy was talking about, though he told her all he knew about it very exactly and over again. She gathered with a great deal of trouble, she was of course just the weeest bit deaf, that the dog was to be called Roverandom and not Rover, because the man in the moon said so. What odd ideas the child has, to be sure. And that he belonged, not to her after all, but to Little Boy 2, because Mummy brought him home with the shrimps. Very well, my dear, if you like, but I thought I brought him from the gardener's brother's son. I haven't told you all their argument, of course. It was long and complicated, as it often is when both sides are right. All that you want to know is that he was called Roverandom after that, and he did belong to the little boy, and went back, when the boy's visit to their grandmother was over, to the house where he had once sat on the chest of drawers. He never did that again, of course. He lived sometimes in the country, and sometimes, most of the time, in the white house on the cliff by the sea. He got to know old Psamathe very well. Never well enough to leave out the P, but well enough, when he was grown up to a large and dignified dog, to dig him up out of the sand and his sleep, and have many and many a chat with him. Indeed, Roverandom grew to be very wise, and had an immense local reputation, and had all sorts of other adventures, many of which the little boy shared. But the ones I have told you about were probably the most unusual and the most exciting. Only Tinker says she does not believe a word of them. Jealous cat. The end.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to this HarperCollins audiobook. If you'd like to receive a HarperCollins catalogue, please call 0181 307 4052. That's 0181 307 4052. Or send your requests to HarperCollins Audiobooks Mail Order Department, Free Post GW 3834, Glasgow G4 OBR. That's Free Post, GW 3834, Glasgow G4 OBR.